Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of Torah Today Ministries, and we are beginning a series today called The Hebrew Key. It's been my experience that so many problematic passages, verses in both the Hebrew and Greek scriptures can be unlocked and explained if we have the Hebrew key. If we understand the Hebrew of the language or a particular word or setting, and it makes everything so much clearer. So I don't know of any better place to start this series than with the passage in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, beginning with verses 17 and 18. Now, if you are older like myself, you were probably raised on the King James Version. It was about the only game in town when I was a kid. And so many of the passages I've memorized and learned are in the King James. And that is where we get this expression we're going to look at today. In verse 17, Yeshua says, "Think not that I came to destroy the law," and of course we know that is the Torah that he's speaking of, "or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." So the question is, what is a jot and what is a tittle? What is Yeshua referring to in this passage? If you're not familiar with King James, then your translation may say something like the New American Standard, which words verse 18 this way: "For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass away from the law," or from the Torah, "until all is accomplished." So the two words we're looking at in Greek are the words iota, which is here in red on the left, and the word karaia, which is the one translated stroke here, or tittles in the King James. In Greek it reads this way: iota ein he mia karaia. It means not iota ein means one, not one iota. He means or, and then mia also means one. Karaia means stroke or tittle. So let's look at these two words, iota and the word karaia. Now, iota is a word that's made its way into English as iota. I know many times my mother would refer to something small and she would say something like, "I cleaned out my purse and there was not one iota of dust in it," or "I cleaned up every speck and every iota of something in the house." And that comes from this Greek word, iota. What is iota? Well, if we look at the Greek alphabet, you'll see the letters here in order from alpha, beta, there's gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, and then the ninth letter right here is the letter iota. Iota. And you'll notice that by far it is the smallest of the letters of the Greek alphabet. So when the New American Standard talks about the smallest letter, it's referring to the iota or the iota. Now I put it in red just so you could see it and it would stand apart from the rest of the letters. But of course, when Yeshua was giving the Sermon on the Mount, he was not speaking in Greek. He did not use the word iota. He would have been speaking in Hebrew or possibly Aramaic, so he would have used the Hebrew equivalent of iota. And in Hebrew, the Hebrew equivalent is the letter yud. Now, Hebrew reads from right to left, so we start with alpha, beta, gimel, dalet, he, vav, zayin, chet, tet, and then we come to the 10th letter, which is right here, and that's the letter yud. And once again, you can see that by far it is the smallest of all the 22 Hebrew letters. So when he was giving the sermon, he would have said, "I'm not going to remove one yud, not one yud will pass from the Torah till all is fulfilled." And the Greek translators translated that to the Greek equivalent of yud, which is iota. Okay, so that's what a jot is. And the King James word jot comes from the word iota. Because my understanding is that back in the early 1600s, late 1500s, in the days of King James, the J was pronounced like a letter Y, a yah. So he would have said a yacht, a iota, not a jot. So let's go back to our word karaya, this word for tittle. Now what I want to do before we move to the next slide is I want you to look at the 7th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That's the letter Zayin. It is a tall, straight letter with a very short cross piece at the top. That's the letter Zayin. You'll see why we're going to draw our attention to that in just a moment. But tittles are actually words that we use in English today, though we don't use them that much. But when we put a dot over an I or a dot over a J, those dots are technically called tittles. They are little markings, diacritic marks that we use in English. And the tittles, though, that Yeshua would have been referring to are the decorations that are found on a number of Hebrew letters in the Torah scroll. Here I have a sampling of Hebrew letters, and as you look at them, you can see these decorations. These are the tittles. Now, they're not called tittles in Hebrew. They're called Tagin, which I believe is an Aramaic word. And a Tagin is a small stroke, a small decoration. They're sometimes called thorns because they look like little thorns stuck into the tops of the letters. And this is what Yeshua is referring to when he says that not one iota, not the smallest letter, the yud, or even the decorations on the letters would pass away from the Torah till all is fulfilled. Now, if you look at one of these tagin, one of these decorations closely, you'll notice that it looks like the letter zayin. It looks like a zayin is stuck on top of the letters. And what is interesting about this is that the letter zayin is said to picture a two-edged sword, a two-edged weapon of some sort. In fact, the name of this letter, the name zayin, means weapon. And the handle would be this part at the top, and then the blade coming down, the two-edged blade. So we can think of these letters with the tagin, the decorations, as being letters that have little weapons attached to them. Now, the reason I'm bringing this out is that I find it fascinating that Psalm 91 is a psalm that is used when rabbis, and this has been the case throughout the millennia, when rabbis are performing an exorcism, they will always read Psalm 91. It's one of my favorite psalms. It's a powerful psalm. Let me read just the first few verses for you. It says, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to Adonai, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and under his wings you will find refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and buckler. You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday." And then the psalm goes on. I read 6 verses. There are 16 total in the psalm. And you can see why this would be a powerful psalm to read if someone is being oppressed by a demonic spirit. And it affirms to them that God can protect them. God is not going to allow the spirit to damage them. And so we try to get the person to read this and acknowledge the truth of these verses and the things that are stated here in this magnificent psalm. Now, here's an interesting thing about this psalm. I've printed it out here with a script typical of what you would find in a scroll. And if you go through, you'll not find a single letter zayin anywhere in the psalm. Now, you'd think that a psalm that is being used as a weapon against the enemy and against the demonic would be filled with the letter zayin, which means weapon. but there's not a zayin to be found. Now, zayin is a very common letter that's used in many, many Hebrew words. It's found throughout the Torah and the prophets and the writings. But this particular psalm, 16 verses, not a single zayin. That would be like writing 16 sentences without ever using the letter T or the letter E. So the rabbis explained that in this psalm, you don't see the weapons, you don't see the zayins, but the little decorations on top of the letters, there they are, the little zayins that decorate the letters. It says in this psalm, in this passage of Scripture, the weapons are spiritual. They're not pronounced as we read the psalm, but they're the decorations on top of the letters. And when we read the psalm, the weapons are released into the spiritual realm because they don't exist here in the physical realm. There's not a zayin anywhere in the psalm. So I find that a beautiful thought, and I think a very powerful one as well. And in my mind, I don't doubt that when this psalm was penned, that the author was not even aware that he left the zayin out of the psalm. There's not a zayin anywhere, because God had many weapons attached to the letters. And when we read this psalm in faith, those weapons are released into the spiritual realm to do battle for us there. So I hope you've enjoyed this little insight into jots and tittles. And so the next time you come across the verse in Matthew 5, it'll mean more to you now. And you'll always remember the power of Psalm 91. So God bless. I'll see you next time as we continue our studies in the Hebrew key. Shalom.